All right. Happy Wednesday, everybody, and welcome to the 71st edition of our mock interview. We've been doing this since the beginning of the pandemic as an opportunity for those who have been out of work. And now with the recent tech layoffs, we're kind of extending that benefit. So welcome, everyone. We're happy to have you. Mock interviews are pretty simple. We have Corey Hiramoto here of careershakers.com. He is a recruiter as well as a career coach, and he's here to interview Saurabh Shah, who is a recruiter as well. So this is one of our Recruiter for Recruiter series. And what will happen is pretty simple. Saurabh has chosen a job description that he'll use that we'll probably put on the screen here. And Corey has prepared a series of questions that he'll ask. And after each one of these questions, he will provide feedback. You in the webinar chat, you're more than welcome to be supportive, ask your own questions, which is always fun, and also cheer Saurabh on, because this is a very brave thing to do, to go on Zoom on a Wednesday night and just bare your entire interviewing soul to the world. So without further ado, Corey, I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to you.
Thanks everyone for tuning in, and we also want it to be beneficial as well. Someone was kind enough to actually email us some of the questions that they wanted us to ask, because they were also a recruiter doing interviews for recruiting roles. And so I'll be asking some audience submitted questions as well as a part of our mock interview tonight. And if you want to provide questions for us to ask, or you just have general questions for me, Albert, or Saurabh, please throw them into the webinar chat as well. And before we dive in, I always like to give a platform to our brave volunteers. So Saurabh, if you want to give a quick background introduction of yourself in like a non-interview setting to the audience, so they can get some context on your qualifications and maybe what kind of companies and other jobs you are looking for. So if anyone in the audience or someone watching this recording later is interested in your profile, they can reach out to you for some opportunities. Take it away.
Hello, everyone. My name is Saurabh, and it's great to be here. So my background is mostly in recruiting. I graduated from UC Berkeley in 2015, December, with a bachelor's in political science. And ever since then, I have been working in recruiting for nearly about 7 years. I started off working at a boutique agency where I supported many different venture-backed startups. The big ones included Dropbox, Roblox, and Limebike. And I recruited for their software data product, GTM teams. And I was later promoted to talent acquisition manager, where I led a team of internal recruiters and basically created learning and development programs to help these recruiters gain more expertise, and basically taught them how to source for people, how to connect with hiring managers, et cetera. And it was a very rewarding experience. So that's basically where I got my foundation in talent acquisition, and I really learned to enjoy it. And I eventually worked for a healthcare startup briefly before getting laid off due to COVID. And over there, I supported their software, data, and design teams. I also worked with my dad briefly, who has his own SaaS software tool that basically its whole purpose is to remove the bias factor in hiring. So how it works is you create this double-blind interview process. You basically select a panel of interviewers from different companies, and then they speak with candidates and give them like an assigned score based on their strength. And it's double blind, so there's no element of bias there. And you create this database of well-vetted candidates, and the clients would eventually have access to these databases, and it would reduce talent acquisition costs on their part. So it's definitely a big investment for these companies as well. We're still in beta mode right now, but we hope to sort of work on that. It's an ongoing project. I also did an RPO with Amazon as well, where I supported their Amazon Web Services, their Alexa teams, and I was mostly working on their software engineering roles. And finally, my last role was briefly at a government contractor, where I supported their program management, ops, data finance, software roles. So, and I'm really looking to find another recruiting opportunity right now. Obviously, with the way the market is, it's just been incredibly difficult, especially on the TA side. So my primary interest, I'm primarily looking at SaaS startups, but I'm also open to any other industries. And in terms of the roles I want to work on, they can be anything from software to GTM product sales, et cetera, because I've had experience, like fortunately, in a very diverse settings. So that's basically a high level summary of my background.
Excellent. All right. So if anyone in the audience or anyone watching the recording is interested in Saurabh's background or is impressed by his interviewing skills, we will have a way for you to reach out and contact him with any of your job opportunities. And if you also want to reach out and just network with anyone on this call as well, please do that. All righty. Are we ready to get started, Saurabh?
Yes, sir. And my LinkedIn is in the chat if anyone wants to connect.
Excellent. Cool. So why don't we start? We'll start with one of my questions, and then we'll get into some of the audience submitted questions after that. Let's start with a nice warm-up question. Tell me about a mistake that you had made at work and what you learned from it.
Absolutely. So I think a mistake I made early on in my career was, so when I first started at a boutique agency, I was brand new to recruiting, and I basically submitted a candidate to our hiring manager, and I was really focused a lot more on numbers and, you know, basically vetting candidates based on their alignment with the target profile. And the hiring manager was not very happy about my feedback, and these were all like software candidates. And the problem I had was because I was new to recruiting and they had all these, you know, tech stacks listed on the resumes, which, I mean, even though they had the requisite tech skills for that particular role, what I did not do was, you know, analyze the degree to which, you know, they had those skills. So I should have asked more questions about, you know, the projects that they worked on, you know, how they work in a team. And, you know, the hiring managers were kind of disappointed because I did not vet far enough. So what I really learned from this experience was that, you know, you when you're evaluating a candidate, you can't just see, oh, you know, they have HTML, CSS, Python, Java listed on the resume, just like it is on the job description. You know, like the years of experience matter, how they use those tools matter. And what I learned from then on was that, you know, I asked a lot more pointed questions and really asked candidates to just give examples of how they use these particular languages and what projects that they've done. And, you know, this way I was able to, you know, really dive deeper into candidates and learn about their soft skills. And that was definitely a learning experience. And it really opened my eyes into how recruiting works. Okay.
And then from a like metrics and pass-through rate perspective, what kind of positive influence did it have on your overall metrics once you were able to make those changes?
Absolutely. So I would say the conversion rate definitely increased as I moved along. So that's basically the number of people who went from being submitted to actually getting an interview. And I would say if I could give a number, it would be about an increase of 15 to 20%.
And then what are some of the key skills or things that you look for now that you're doing a deeper dive in your screenings that have made a difference? Or I guess, what is a good leading indicator?
Absolutely. So a good leading indicator is how well they describe their projects. So whenever I'm asking a candidate about, you know, describing a project that they worked on, which is relevant to the role that I'm recruiting for, how they come up with, you know, an answer, you know, how detailed are they in their examples? How confident do they sound? How do they, you know, present themselves? Meaning, you know, are they taking accountability for any mistakes they've made? And are they showing, you know, that they've learned and that, you know, through examples and metrics, they're able to prove that, you know, they have really learn from those mistakes. I also look for how they function in a team environment. For instance, a lot of software engineers, they're really good technically, but they don't really have the interpersonal skills needed to work in a team environment. And this is definitely a disadvantage if it's, somebody looking to work in a small startup, because, people must wear many different hats and they must take on ad hoc tasks. And another thing I look for is passion about what they're doing. And, if they're passionate about the mission of the company, or, if they worked at a startup that's, relevant, it shows that, this isn't just somebody who wants to stay at one place for a short term and leave. They want to be in that same company and grow their career and get promoted and learn, because ultimately, these are the people who are going to be successful. They may have the qualifications, but, they should also show that they have the soft skills and the desire to learn and to improve, because these things can't really be taught.
Gotcha. Okay, cool. So we'll move into some feedback here. So first of all, I know I asked quite a bit of questions. So just to recap for the audience, the original question was, tell me about a mistake that you made at work and what you learned from it. So one of the good things that Saurabh did is he chose an example that was from a very long time ago. And he prefaced it by saying, when I first started in recruiting, one of the mistakes I made was blank. This is good because it still answers the question, which is to tell them to talk about a mistake, which obviously you don't generally want to talk about mistakes in an interview, but that's why I chose this question, is because he chose one from so long ago, and it was early on in his career, that as an employer or a hiring manager or an interviewer, I'm like, okay, that was such a long time ago, like it's not a red flag for me. So where possible, do what Saurabh did, where you pick an actual mistake you made, but from something hopefully a while ago that didn't carry over. And then, of course, he talks about what he had learned from it. And then the other thing that you're going to want to do is, and then that's what I was trying to get to with the follow-up questions, was to give that sense of confidence to the recruiter or the interviewer that you're not going to make this mistake again. And the best way to address that potential doubt is talking about, okay, what is the methodology that he's developed from this, or what are some key tactics, or what are some processes that he's built for himself so that he doesn't create these types of mistakes again. And also that's why I asked about the metrics or the pass-through rates, right? Because if he can say, yes, I made this mistake when I first started as a recruiter at an agency, but once I made that one mistake, I never made it again, and my pass-through rates increased by 15 to 20%, thus proving to me that, okay, he only made the mistake one time, and now he's a much better recruiter, and now I want to hire him. And so that's what I was trying to get to with some of those follow-up questions. But overall, the answers were very good. I think just need to put everything together all at once without too many follow-up questions would probably be the only piece of feedback I have. But the example was great. The metrics you had were good. And how you were talking about leading indicators is also very good. And Emily, I saw your question in the chat. She was asking, what are you looking to assess when I ask about leading indicators? So one thing I'm looking for, hopefully for like a senior recruiter, is something technical that they look for and something non-technical. So Saurabh talked about how he looks for passion and basically how their communication skills are when they're able to describe their projects. And then since he's mostly specialized software hiring, I would also like to hear what he specifically looks for someone to demonstrate a strong level of domain expertise, whether that's front end, back end, or full stack, where hopefully he knows some certain keywords, or he knows that there's some type of really complex like feature that someone has been able to build using a certain language. And once he hears that, then he's like, oh, okay, this person's actually really good, and it's not just like an all right software engineer, right? So that's probably some things that people would look for in a leading indicator. All right, cool. So now let's go into one of our audience submitted questions here. And for context, they are also a recruiter, and they're also interviewing for roles right now. And these are some of the questions that they thought were difficult, and they kind of stumbled upon when they were asked these questions in their recruiting interviews. So, Saurabh, how do you prioritize your work when you have many different projects and many different roles to work on, and you ensure that you meet all of your deadlines?
So I really love using project management tools like Asana and Google Calendar to really map out my schedule for the entire week. And I always keep a tab open for that and use that as a source of truth. So the way I like to structure my work is, for example, I like to dedicate the first 2 hours just for sourcing. And then I usually like to keep my candidate calls for the remainder of the week. And the reason for that is usually candidates are more active on LinkedIn first thing in the morning. And usually they are more likely to check LinkedIn according to algorithmic statistics on Monday and Tuesday. So I usually reserve those 2 days more for sourcing. And I also ensure that, if anything, comes up that is, sudden or any like ad hoc task I work on, the first thing I do is always add it to my calendar and my project management tool to basically give like a reasonable amount of time to really work on that particular task. And, this way I'm really able to, work on prioritizing my tasks. And if the deadline is sooner, then I dedicate more time to those tasks. But if it's something that can take a longer time, then I usually like spread out the time I would be working on that throughout the entire week.
And so imagine you had, 20 requisitions or 20 headcount to fill, all for different hiring managers and different roles, right? Imagine it's a startup, you got to hire sales, operations, finance, engineering, etc. How would you know which roles to prioritize in your sourcing, and how would you know which hiring managers to appease? Because you're one person, there's no way you can appease all of the hiring managers, right? So how would you make that decision?
Absolutely. So I think it really all depends on how critical the hire is. So, if this is say like engineering manager who is, who can really, put the team together as soon as they come on, and the hiring manager has really been, emphasizing this, then I would be definitely focusing on those roles more. So it really depends on the urgency of like if there's like a new project that's being shipped. And the way I determine how important a role is through the intake meetings I have with the different hiring managers. If it's like a more supporting QA type role that doesn't have to be filled right away, then I usually wait to work on those roles as soon as I take care of the more prioritized roles. So the way I like to structure, is to basically assign each role like a number from 1 to 2, 3, 3 meaning, a more critical hire, and 1 meaning something that could be put on the back burner for the time being. And I think, this way, I'm able to really ensure that I'm dedicating my time to hiring managers who have, the most urgent needs.
Great. Okay, cool. So in terms of feedback, one of the things I loved immediately was Saurabh hit me with some knowledge and told me that statistically, candidates are more likely to respond to LinkedIn messages on Mondays and Tuesdays, which is why he organizes his schedule to do messages and outreach on Mondays and Tuesdays, which I didn't know that. So that's super cool that he does it. And he gave me that context, which shows that he has the strategic thinking as well as the data, which obviously enhances his answer and makes the whole organization of it seem much more legitimate and makes sense, right? And then he uses project management tools, his Google Calendar, just like every other candidate will probably give you as an answer. And so that's why I wanted to probe a little bit deeper in terms of, okay, how do you actually prioritize? Because every hiring manager is going to tell you that their job is important, right? They're all going to tell you it's super critical to the company that they get their hire first. And for those of you who have worked in startups as recruiters, you know that you have to support everybody, and you're only one person, one woman, one man, and you obviously can't prioritize everybody, even though they all feel like they're important. So Saurabh also did a very good job of addressing how he would prioritize them. And the key takeaway there is basically he uses his business acumen or his business knowledge to understand which roles are truly a P0 and which ones are truly not. And he gave the example, like a QA engineer probably would be a lower priority than hiring somebody working on like a key feature or or a key product, right? And one thing that he did that is good that I see a lot of people make a mistake is when I ask about how you would prioritize, a lot of people will say, oh, well, then I would go to my manager and ask for guidance, which is obviously what you would do in real life, but this is an interview. And so you wouldn't want to shift, I guess, responsibilities away from yourself in an interview perspective. And that's one thing he obviously did not do, which is a very good answer. Well done. Okay, so the next question, and I see the questions in the chat. I will get to that in a second. This is the last audience submitted question, and that is, so Rob, how would you handle a situation where you're getting conflicting information from the hiring manager and the head of the department? So they're both giving you conflicting information in terms of who you should be hiring or what type of job you should be filling. How would you handle that situation?
So I'm assuming that the hiring manager and the head of the department are kind of on the same team. And so what I would do there is I would schedule intake meetings right away with, the two people. And basically I would try to gain both perspectives on, what they believe would be the most critical hire, what skill sets they believe. And it really depends obviously on like what exactly these two people are differing on. And based off of that, I would gather all the notes. And then, for example, if it's about skill sets, right? Like the hiring manager wants a software engineer who has 5 years of experience and, worked in a cryptocurrency company, for example. Whereas the head of the department is, he's a lot more focused on soft skills and he has no problem with somebody with about 2 years of experience and boot camps to join the team. And, obviously, these are two very different backgrounds. And the way I would counter that is through, using past examples of people whom I've placed in a similar role. And basically the way I would answer it is, I would basically use that as evidence to indicate, it's really all about, the soft skills that you bring on. And as well as, the technical knowledge that you have. So definitely their GitHub presence, some of the projects they've worked on, hackathons they participated in, how well they are at leading a team. So I would always emphasize, looking at a candidate holistically to ensure that, and not just, relying on any one metric, because I feel like a lot of the differences that people have within a company come from, not talking with one another and just, from their own, personal experience and personal biases. And I would also use this scenario as a way to advocate for more like dialogue between people within a company. And yeah, that's basically how I would handle, if there's a lot of difference.
Okay. And so what happens even after you share your example of people you've placed in similar roles? They still do not agree on the ideal profile for the candidate. What would you do then?
Well, then what I would do is I would go to like the internal software team that we have and then point out that, because obviously not everybody, regardless if the companies are big or small, necessarily comes from the same background. So, I would always highlight that, you are going to have people who are coming from different backgrounds. No two software engineers, are exactly the same. And, honestly, I may not completely remove all the biases that people have or disagreements, but, all I can do is just, point to data, empirical data, both from my background and what you see at the company, to just sort of, convince the folks that, it is a good idea to, think outside the box and be creative. So, it's one conversation is not going to resolve this. This is something that's, going to innovatively take time to, work on. So I just think it's important to be realistic while also encouraging, dialogue and et cetera.
Got it. Okay, cool. So this is a super difficult question because there's never a right answer, and there's so many different ways that like the scenario could fork and change, and it's like, well, what if they did this, or like what if you did this and they didn't like this, or what if this, right? So this does make this question extremely difficult, which is why I could see why people would want advice on how to do it. And Sarab's approach, I think, is correct as well, in terms of getting both of them together and in the same meeting, giving examples, trying to use data to drive decisions, and hopefully you can influence one or the other to change their opinion or move closer to what the other person is doing. Other things that come to mind that you would may want to include in your answer is leveraging your perspective as a recruiter. I think that was one thing that I didn't quite hear as much that came to the forefront. Like obviously there's other restrictions. Maybe the head of the department thinks he has an unlimited budget, but the hiring manager truly knows that he can't pay someone more than X dollars. And so that may already like answer the question itself, right? You could just come in simply and say, hey, Mr. Executive, you think you can take somebody with 5 years of experience with a master's degree, but our budget only goes to 200,000, and you're not going to be able to get somebody for 200,000, for example, in the Bay Area. So if that's really what you want, then you would need to give my hiring manager additional budget to fulfill this role. Or he could use his knowledge, because he's been in the software space for so long, he could maybe even provide an alternative option that kind of meets in the middle based on what he understands the requirements or the features that the company is working on or developing. He could recommend, hey, you actually don't need somebody with this much years of experience, which is what the hiring manager or head of the department believes. And he could say, in fact, you could probably hire someone to do this if they had 2 years of experience and a coding bootcamp, as long as we structured the interviews in a certain way where we were heavily focusing on, on their Java, whatever capabilities, and you could help them build out the appropriate interview panel, set up the structure, all that type of stuff, right? So there's a lot of different ways to do it. There's many different correct ways. I don't know if there's necessarily a wrong way to answer this question, but I think if there was any point of feedback, it'd be that. I would want to hear more about your recruiting knowledge and how you would leverage that to influence your clients, leveraging your domain knowledge. Make sense?
Yeah, no, I see what you're saying.
But everything else you said, though, is also correct, right? Like how you approached it, it doesn't typically get resolved in one meeting. All that stuff is still correct. All right. Okay, so I got lots of questions in the chat. Here's one. Is recruiting a team sport? I guess, do you believe recruiting is a team sport? And what is your approach to working remote from your team?
I absolutely think recruiting is a team sport because, especially, in an internal setting, because, we are all, even though we are working on different departments, requisitions, we are all bound by the mission of bringing on the best people onto the team. And so, even though, the roles are different, there's a lot of commonality in like our hiring methods. So for example, in the healthcare startup that I worked at, we read this book, I'm sure you know about the WHO hiring method. And it talks about, the methodologies that, successful companies have used in the past to bring on A players. And every week we would have, we would be like presenting and read the book out loud and share our insights on one another. And the whole idea is to basically motivate one another and, share what worked and what didn't work for us when we were sourcing for candidates, because chances are, other recruiters who are working on completely different role could really benefit from that knowledge. So I think having that space to exchange ideas with one another and really just, the camaraderie that every recruiting team that I've been on, whether it's at an agency or internally, we, all want to work in an environment where we are all supporting with each other. As far as remote work, obviously, there's that flexibility of working from wherever you want, but I'm always, connected to the team via Slack, and we have Zoom meetings. And this way I'm able to, keep up to date with, where everybody is on whether or not we're all on the same page. So for me, I've never, recruiting never happens in a vacuum. There's just so many factors. And I think, having a team of people who've been recruiters for a long time, we all learn from one another, and we all support one another, whether we're working remotely or whether we're in the office together.
Okay. Okay. So this question is, if I'm analyzing the question correctly, I believe you would be asked this because it's really like a hidden teamwork slash leadership question. So the question was, do you believe recruiting is a team sport? The answer obviously is yes, right? And then the follow-up question was, what is your approach to working remote with your team? So because it's a teamwork slash leadership question that's kind of hidden here, Sarab's answer is a good baseline to start, right? Like he obviously says, yes, it's a team sport. He gave an example about how they operate in a team, they read a book, shared knowledge, upskill each other. And then he talks about how he maintains relationships even though his team may be remote. Cool. Now, because it's a teamwork and leadership question, in addition to those things, we also want to talk about, okay, because we're focusing on teamwork here, what are some things that Sarab will do to ensure that the team is successful together? So he has the example of them reading the same book and then sharing stories together. But I would also love to hear examples of times maybe how he's personally had to train somebody or onboard somebody, or he's improved the process so that recruiting became easier for not just for him, but for his whole team, perhaps. And then also when they ask about how do you ensure working with remote teammates, that's also a great time to show some leadership as well. So maybe you can talk a little bit about an example about a time where you were able to, help somebody who was struggling, even though it wasn't your role, because it's a team sport, right? As you said. And so even though it didn't help your metrics, by helping somebody or working through a difficult close that they had, or helping them with a difficult hiring manager or a difficult candidate or something like that, it shows that you have leadership capabilities, but you also know how to play in a team environment, even if it doesn't necessarily immediately benefit you. So those are things that you may want to add to that type of answer. But it's definitely a tricky question because of how it's worded. It presents like it's one thing, which is like a rather simple answer, but I believe a company would ask this because it's like a hidden teamwork leadership question. But thank you for the audience submitted question, Elizaveta. I probably didn't pronounce that correctly, but thank you. That's a tough one. Probably would have tripped me up in an interview as well.
Yeah, I took it at face value.
All right. And questions from Emily. Sarab, tell me about a time you managed a project and had to redirect the team towards the project goal, and how did you do it? So I guess another way to word it is, tell me about a time you were managing a project, but the team was going in the wrong direction. How did you redirect them towards the project goal?
Absolutely. So when I was working at a boutique agency, we decided to organize a networking event that brought together local startups and local college students to give us an opportunity to generate visibility. And so I think a struggle we had there was after assigning, so I brought together a team of 6 people to help plan this event and execute it. And one of the struggles we had was so the team member who was responsible for reaching out to the companies, they kind of focused on the large companies like Facebook, Google, etc. Obviously, given that we were a very, very small company, and even if we had worked with some large companies like Dropbox, we knew it would be a challenge to bring on one of the FAANG companies as a potential client, given that we just were very tiny, and these clients already had multiple agencies that they were working with it, so it was very saturated. So instead, we came up with an alternative plan where we could reach out to really small startups, and this networking event would help them generate visibility that they would not otherwise get. And we focused, on a very, hot technology at the time, virtual reality. This was in the mid 2010s. And so instead, we sort of changed tracks a little bit and focused on our efforts on reaching out to some of these virtual reality startups. And ultimately, we were able to gain about 6 companies to be present at our networking event. We had our logistics down, and we had about 200 students attend after successfully targeting UC San Francisco State and UC Berkeley students to, attend our networking event by doing marketing with their career centers. And ultimately, we were able to get about 2 or 3 new clients to join our company. So not only we were able to gain visibility and help, young people gain jobs in tech and get their foot in the door, but we ultimately were able to generate revenue. So this was definitely a worthwhile investment. And how we did it was, we identified, a space that wasn't tapped into, very small startups to join because, name recognition it would be nice to have Google, don't get me wrong, but, Google already does a lot of networking on its own. We were a very obscure agency, so it wouldn't be beneficial for them. So, I think being more strategic and sort of, thinking outside the box definitely helped us here.
Okay, cool. Good example to share, because obviously it's recruiting related, which is good. Saurabh had the results, numbers, metrics ready to go. It was clearly very impactful for both the business and their clients. Checks all those boxes. So everything in the R category was great. So if you're thinking about the STAR method, right? Situation, task, action, result. R was good. The situation was clear. The tasks that you had to do were a little unclear in terms of like what you were responsible for versus what other people were responsible for. The actions when it comes to like how you redirected the team, that was clear, right? Someone was targeting the wrong types of companies. And so you made the recommendation to pivot and target different types of companies, which had benefits both for you as the agency as well as for those companies as well. So that part was very, very clear. So I think the only thing was kind of clarifying like what you were responsible for versus what other people were responsible for. And then one thing to keep in mind, you used we a lot during the example, which normally would be fine, but because we are asking how you, about a time you were managing a project and how you redirected the team, you may want to do less we, because then I won't know what you did versus what someone else did versus what you kind of helped with versus what you actually helped out with, like what you owned versus like just kind of helped out. So try to use I a little bit more for these types of questions. But other than that, it's good to use we because it shows that you're a team player, right? You're not thinking about yourself all the time. But just because of how this question was prompted, you may want to use I a little bit more.
Okay, for sure. That's good feedback.
All right. Now, Albert, I do see your questions, but I'm going to go through some of mine and then we'll circle back to yours at the end here. Okay, so we got some soft skill stuff out of the way. We got some client management questions. So let's do a recruiting focused question. So Saurabh, tell me about a time you used an innovative sourcing strategy or technique to find a qualified candidate.
Absolutely. So one of our clients at Cardinal Hire was a major East Coast financial institution, which wanted a very senior level data scientist who had lots of academic experience and a PhD. So I initially started my search through Boolean X-ray sourcing on LinkedIn, searching for data scientists with PhDs, et cetera. The problem wasn't that there was a shortage of candidates. The problem was, the outreach. So for each candidate through LinkedIn outreach, I really just focused on sort of personalizing and whatnot, but the response rate was very, very low. And this was probably because some of the people who responded said that they don't respond to LinkedIn outreaches, or they turn off their messages to not get any in-mails, because they were constantly being pinged by recruiters given their qualifications. And so because, you know, the hiring manager really wanted this role to be filled quickly, and it was a critical hire. And so I came up with another strategy, which was to, and because this was an East Coast company, you know, their pipeline usually comes from major universities in the East Coast and the Northeast. So what I did was I went to, you know, the econometrics and statistics websites of schools like Cornell, Purdue, Carnegie Mellon, Rutgers. And then I would, you know, look at their postdocs that were there, and they had their academic emails. I eventually, you know, picked about 15 or 20 people who I felt had, you know, the economics and data science tools needed for this particular role, just looking at their CV. And then through their academic email, I sent them like a detailed message. So the first paragraph was, you know, talking about the research, showing excitement for the stuff they worked on. And the reason for this is usually, you know, people with PhDs love talk about, you know, their research. And then I did that for, you know, all 15 people I reached out to, and ultimately the response rate was better. About 6 or 7 of those people reached out after, you know, 2 or 3 follow-ups, which is a really high response rate. Even though, and ultimately, you know, the hiring managers were very pleased about the candidates that we submitted them. Ultimately, I was not able to place a candidate for this role because they eventually decided to promote internally. But through my creative sourcing outreach and my, you know, the time and effort I invested into really understanding the candidates for the role and personalizing my message accordingly paid off, because I was able to increase the response rate for this particular role by about 60%, as opposed to just a simple X-ray LinkedIn Boolean search, which, you know, didn't really work out.
Excellent. Cool. So I like this one because he's got metrics to back up all of the claims that he's made. And it is a creative sourcing strategy, right? Like not many people think about checking the PhD programs because all of them have like either labs or things that they worked on. Sometimes you can even find their research articles on like Google Scholar or IEEE or things like that. And a lot of them do post their personal emails whenever they have footnotes or whenever they're giving their introductions in their research papers. So definitely a creative sourcing strategy. So check, answer the question. It's like the one thing we're looking for here is the level of creativity that someone comes up with, right? So for someone to say, oh, I tried LinkedIn, couldn't find them, so then I went to GitHub and then I got their email. Not the most impressive answer, because that's kind of what every technical recruiter is going to tell you is their like creative sourcing strategy. So I like Saurabh's answer in that it's truly creative out of everybody's. So for those recruiters watching, yeah, just saying you found somebody on GitHub instead of LinkedIn, probably not the best example to share. All right. Let's see here. I want to do one more recruiting question. Aha. Okay. And this is one I got asked relatively recently. So Saurabh, imagine you joined our company, Scale AI or whatever company you want. Imagine you joined our company, okay, and you are now going to, I'm telling you that you are going to be going to a hiring manager kickoff meeting to help kick off one of their brand new job requisitions. How would you handle this meeting?
Absolutely. So the first thing I would do is really ask the hiring managers, you know, the purpose of having this particular role open and how it would benefit the company as a whole, like what place does it have? And then what I would do from there is, once I have the mission down, I would talk about timeline, like how soon do they want this person in the role? And also the next thing I would talk about are any logistical questions, such as, how much, like whether or not they want this person to be remote, or what budget are they allocating for this role. And then after all the logistical and overarching questions are settled, I would then get into the nitty gritty of the skill sets. So for example, if they wanted a backend engineer, I would ask the hiring managers about, what kind of team, technologies do they want this person to have, and how many years. And of course, it varies for each tool. Maybe they want, 2 years of Python, or 3 years of SQL, or, X years of any other object-oriented tool. And another question I would ask them is what sort of startups or what sort of companies they want to have this person from. And then they would say, we want people with, X years of fintech, or we don't want people from, these types of companies like Oracle or whatnot. And then, so the whole kickoff, the purpose of the kickoff meeting is really to just, understand the role at a high level and create like an ideal but flexible candidate profile for this particular position. And obviously I would then, each of the hiring managers would probably be, offering a differing perspective on who they believe would be most qualified for this position. And what I would do with that information is I would sort of, create like not a very kind of open-ended profile that sort of allowed for, flexibility on who to hire. And because, of course, and that's something that, I would always emphasize, and using, my particular domain knowledge, I would also offer my perspective on, how we can sort of, structure the interview process if somebody came from, the Caltech or Stanford versus somebody who is self-taught and comes from a boot camp. So, I would always emphasize that, the evaluation should always be holistic and tailored towards the candidate relative to the profile that we're working on.
Okay. Now imagine you knew like a little bit about the role before you even had the first kickoff meeting, right? Like imagine I, as your manager, I told you, hey, client Susan is going to be kicking off a search. You're going to meet with her tomorrow. It's for what we think is like a back-end software engineer. Would you do anything before the meeting?
Yeah, absolutely. So I would ask about the role that's in question, and basically, ask follow-up questions about, anything that's not on the job description, what sort of companies they wanted, how many years of experience, which technologies do they emphasize more, because all this information may not necessarily be clear at first glance from the job description. So I think any follow-up questions to clarify the profile is definitely important.
Is there anything else you would do before the meeting?
Anything else would be sort of seeing how, sorry, I kind of misunderstood the question.
No, I mean, I think you're understanding it correctly. I'm just asking one more time. Is there anything else you would do before the meeting that is tomorrow? So your kickoff meeting, your first meeting with the hiring manager is tomorrow, but you have some general information about the role, right? It's a back-end software engineer. Is there anything else you would do before the meeting with the hiring manager tomorrow?
Yeah, definitely like brainstorm a few follow-up questions that I could ask the hiring manager that may not necessarily
be besides follow-up questions. What else? Is there anything else you would do?
Anything else that I would do? Also, sorry, I kind of trampled on this one.
It's okay.
I'm trying to think.
And the answer could be, there's nothing else I would think about doing.
I don't think there would be anything else. I think just having a few follow-up questions and when you're talking to the hiring manager is obviously very important, and talking about how critical this hire is to their team. So really trying to understand the role holistically is really all I can do. Yeah.
Okay, no worries. So in terms of feedback, the main gist of the question, I would say like 80% of the question is going to be focused on how are you running the actual kickoff meeting for a new role. And Saurabh covered a lot of the stuff. Obviously, you want to get information about the role and things like that, but you also want to think about stuff outside the box, right? Location strategy, DEI, as well as like how you're going to set up interview panels, right? Leveling, market data, that type of stuff. Skill set obviously is important as well. But one thing that every interviewer, hiring manager is going to be looking for in terms of before you go to a kickoff meeting, assuming you had the time, you should also come with some sample candidates to present to hiring managers to see if, obviously you didn't have the full context of the role, so it's not going to be correct, but it does provide a very good impression if you're able to say, hey, all I knew is that it was a backend engineer, didn't know how much experience. So I got a mixture of profiles here. I got some senior folks, some mid-level folks, some junior folks. Take a look at these backgrounds. Let me know if I'm kind of in the right direction. I was thinking because our company does cloud service software, I was targeting SMB startups, medium-sized companies, and of course like Oracle, Azure, etc., AWS. I've got a mixture of profiles. Help me figure out which ones are good fits and not good fits for certain reasons, right? If you could come prepared with some pipelining, even though it may not be correct, that's also like a great thing to do before a meeting, which is why I tried to ask you a few times if there's anything else that you would want to do before an actual kickoff meeting. But all the other answers, all the other parts of your answers were correct. And don't forget DEI, of course.
Oh yeah, absolutely. That's big for me.
Yep. Okay, cool. So I know Albert submitted a lot of questions. So let's speed run one Albert question. And Albert, I'm going to pick the one that I like the most, which I have heard quite a bit in recruiter interviews. So Rob, how do you ensure that there's a very good candidate experience regardless of outcome for the candidates that you work with?
So for me, my number one rule is to always be responsive. If a candidate, asks me a question or responds, I always make sure to respond within 24 to 48 hours or within 1 or 2 business days, because I want the candidate to, because obviously the purpose is, not only to show that, you're somebody who's paying attention, but this can, especially if they're a strong candidate, they are probably entertaining multiple companies right now. So you want to move fast and efficiently. And if they're concerned about, say, the company culture, if they read like a review on Glassdoor, I would sort of, talk about the fact that we do have a very robust team and sort of, address that. Whether if it's somebody who chose to leave the role within 4 months and the candidate saw it and they were not happy about it and they were worried about high turnover, I would give them statistics on the fact that our turnover is not that high, and that we definitely prioritize, we focus on all the other like cultural areas as well as opportunities for growth and DEI and etc., all the other facets that make working here great. And in addition to that, trying to ensure that our also working with the hiring managers to get interviews scheduled as quickly as possible, and to reduce the time to fill, and creating panel interviews if necessary, to ensure that our time is being used efficiently. And this also helps other candidates as well, because if we are giving a lot of time to one candidate that can be condensed, it can drastically reduce the backlog for other candidates, and then that positive candidate experience can be across the board.
Cool. For the sake of time, I'm going to speed run my feedback as well. Everything is good. The only thing I would suggest is adding a little bit of structure to your answer, because it'll make it sound much more strategic and methodic, I don't know if that's the right word. Anyways, so to synthesize your answer down, you could say to ensure a really positive candidate experience, there's three main areas that I really want to focus on. The first is responsiveness, because candidates really value how quickly your recruiter gets back to them. So they feel really valued as a candidate, regardless of whether or not they got an offer. The second thing that I want to ensure is that there is a that we can reduce the time to hire as much as possible, because that also influences a candidate's overall experience, because they don't want to feel like they were dragged out just to either get rejected, or even if they're hired, they're going to be wondering why it took us so long. It makes them feel like they aren't a top priority for us. And then the third area in which I like to focus on is around ensuring that there is a fair interviewing panel, which is I think what you were alluding to as well. It's just like ensuring that you can set up the panels in an appropriate way so they don't have to constantly do extra interviews, because that could also create some friction for candidates, which is like, oh, you told me I only need to do 4 interviews. Why'd I have to do 5? Or why'd I have to do 6, right? Because sometimes maybe someone was supposed to assess something and they didn't, and now you're gonna do another interview. So those are like 3 main areas in which you want to ensure that you're constantly focusing on to provide a great candidate experience, and you've received good feedback from your candidates. Like, I don't know if your past companies track candidate feedback, but you can give some metrics, right? Like, I've got like a 92% satisfaction rate from candidates who even have not gotten an offer. Boom, done. But yeah, thanks so much, Saurabh. This was great. All your answers were solid. Everyone can learn a whole lot. You've clearly been practicing. And so thank you, everybody, for tuning in. I know there were some questions we did not get to, but tune in for the next one. Albert, over to you.
Awesome, wonderful. Yep. And I'm going to go ahead and share the next one into our Zoom chat here. This is coming up next a week from tomorrow, actually. So next Thursday, where we're going to be featuring a new graduate who is looking for a role in customer success, specifically in the veterinary space. Also wanted to point all of you here to a couple of additional webinars that may be of interest. Tomorrow, we have our monthly June 2023 jobs report and inflation update. So this is for you geeks out there, or for those of you who just want to hang around an economist for about an hour and a half, talking about the state of the job market, where things are headed, and how you can make your decisions based on that. For those of you who are also impressed by what Corey had to offer today, we are also hosting a 5 weeks to hired summer 2023 interviewing bootcamp. Tickets start at $297 for that one. We do have a video that you can watch if you're interested in that as well, so please reach out to me. We offer 5 weeks of interviewing curriculum that will help you tell your stories just like Saurabh did, get the coaching that you need, and stand out in this super, super competitive market. And so until next time, hopefully tomorrow, we wish you the best of luck in everything, and let us know how we can continue to support you as you approach your job search. Thank you, everybody, and we will talk to you all soon. Bye.
Thank you, guys.